I knew something was wrong the moment my son leaned toward me and whispered, "Mom, don't tell anyone you're my mother." My name is Evelyn Harper, 66 years old, retired nurse from California. I had flown across the country to Vermont just to see Andrew's new home, the one he said was his big achievement. I was still holding the pie I had baked that morning, the same apple pie he used to beg for when he was little. The sweetness clung to my hands, but his words stung deeper than any burn I ever got from the oven. He didn't look at me when he said it, as if even eye contact might give away what he was trying to hide. His wife, Rachel, was already at the doorway, smiling politely, but with that tightness around her eyes that told me I was not welcome. Not fully. "Welcome, Evelyn," she said, her voice smooth as glass. Not Mom, not Grandma, just Evelyn. I followed them inside, my knees aching from the long flight, but the pain in my chest was sharper. The entryway shined with expensive tile, the kind of floor you hesitate to step on. Andrew's voice dropped again as he gestured at the neighbors watering their lawns across the street. "Just wave, smile like a guest." A guest? That was what I had become in the house I helped him buy. My name was still on the deed, though he had asked me to sign those papers 2 years ago when the bank wouldn't approve him a loan. I had written the check for the down payment, $250,000, money I saved from years of long night shifts at the hospital after my husband passed. I had believed I was investing in family. Standing there in his polished hallway, no pictures of me on the walls, no sign that I had ever mattered. I felt my breath catch. He had erased me, at least in front of others. I didn't say a word. I just smiled at Rachel, clutched the warm pie tighter, and stepped inside the house that was mine and yet no longer mine. No. And that was the moment I decided I wouldn't stay silent forever. Rachel led me down a spotless hallway, her heels clicking softly against the polished floor. "We've set up the guest room for you," she said, glancing over her shoulder as though I might get lost in my own son's house. Guest room. Not my room. Not a place that belonged to me. Just a temporary corner. Like I was passing through. Andrew opened the door with a practiced smile, revealing a space that could have been pulled from a hotel catalog, a neatly made bed, a suitcase stand, a nightstand with a card that read, "Welcome guests, Wi-Fi password, Hillcrest 1. Even the font looked corporate. There were no books, no photographs, not even a chair to sit in. It was a room designed for someone who wasn't meant to stay. I set my small bag on the bed, the pie still warm in my hands. "Where should I put this?" I asked softly. Rachel barely glanced up. "Just leave it on the counter. We're mostly doing gluten-free these days. But the kids might like a piece." Her tone carried that gentle dismissal, the kind that told me I had brought something from another life that no longer fit here. The children, Rachel's from her first marriage, peeked in, mumbled a quick hello, then darted upstairs before I could even remember their names. They had never met me before. And my granddaughter, the baby I had longed to hold, was asleep in a sleek white bassinet in the next room, guarded as if I were an intruder rather than family. Andrew lingered at the doorway, his hands deep in his pockets. "Just try to relax tonight. Mom, it's mostly Rachel's circle, doctors and attorneys and neighbors. You know, that crowd." I nodded, though what I felt was the weight of his unspoken words. Don't speak too much. Don't remind anyone who you are. When he closed the door behind him, I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the blank white walls, and in that quiet, I reminded myself of a truth they had chosen to forget. I wasn't here as a guest. My name was still carved into the foundation of this house. The next morning, I woke earlier than the rest of the house. The Vermont air was cooler than I was used to, and the silence pressed against me like a reminder that I did not belong. In the kitchen, the counters gleamed with nothing out of place, and the coffee machine looked more complicated than some of the monitors I used to work with at the hospital. I managed to brew a thin, bitter cup, then sat quietly at the breakfast bar, waiting to be noticed. Rachel breezed in wearing her athletic jacket, slicing fruit into a tall blender without looking my way. Andrew stood by the refrigerator, scrolling through his phone as if the world outside the screen mattered more than the woman sitting in his kitchen. "We're heading to the farmer's market, then the park," Rachel announced. I smiled politely. "That sounds nice. I may just take a walk, stretch my legs a bit." Andrew finally lifted his eyes, hesitated, then said, "Sure, but don't talk to anyone too long. People here are particular." His words landed like another small cut. Why would a walk around the block be dangerous, unless he was still trying to keep me invisible? When they left in a rush of baby bags and strollers, the silence returned. I wandered the halls, letting my hand brush against the cold white walls. Every frame displayed Rachel's family, vacations on sailboats, her parents smiling in Tuscany, the baby staged in sepia tones, not a single photo of Andrew's childhood, not even one of us together. I paused at the laundry room door. Inside, stacked machines hummed, and beside them a tall cabinet stood slightly ajar. I tugged it open and froze. Folders, labeled neatly, sat in rows. I pulled one, beige, familiar. Inside, the closing summary, the mortgage documents, the deed. And there, in black and white, Evelyn Harper, primary holder. His name below mine, in smaller print. I traced my signature with my finger, steady and undeniable. For the first time since stepping off the plane, I felt the ground solid beneath me. That evening, Rachel announced she had invited a couple from across the street for dinner. She said it casually, like she was mentioning the weather, but her eyes flickered to me as if to measure whether I understood my role. The table was already set when they arrived. Candles, artisan bread, the scent of rosemary drifting through the air. The couple, Mark and Lydia, stepped in with a bottle of white wine. Rachel beamed, moving to make introductions before I could even stand. "This is Evelyn," she said lightly. "An old family friend from California." Family friend. The word slid into the room like a knife disguised as a compliment. I forced a smile and reached out to shake Lydia's hand. "It's nice to meet you," she said warmly. "Are you staying long?" "Just a few days," I replied, steadying my voice. "It's always interesting to visit places you've invested in." There was a pause. Lydia tilted her head, uncertain whether I was joking. Rachel's knife slowed mid-slice. Andrew coughed into his glass. Mark gave a polite laugh that didn't quite land. I let the silence hang just long enough before lifting my wine and taking a small sip. Through dinner, I watched them all play their parts. Rachel telling stories about local events, Andrew nodding at the right moments, the neighbors complimenting the marble countertops. I listened without interrupting, though each word reminded me how carefully they had built a world where I did not exist. When dessert was served, small tarts arranged perfectly on glass plates, I caught Andrew's eyes across the table. For a moment, his polished confidence slipped, and I saw the boy he once was, waiting to see if I would embarrass him. I didn't. I only held his gaze and gave the smallest smile, not warm, not cold, just enough to remind him that I was still here. Later, in the guest room, I stared at the photo of the deed on my phone. I had thought silence would be the kindest choice, but now Silence felt like surrender, and I had no intention of surrendering. Long after the neighbors left and the house had gone still, I sat on the edge of the guest bed with the lights dimmed. In my lap lay my phone, screen glowing with the photograph of the deed. My name first, Andrew's beneath mine in smaller print. I stared at it the way one might stare at armor before a battle, steadying myself for what might come next. The memory of that phone call returned, sharp and clear. Andrew's voice had been urgent that night 2 years ago. "Mom, this is the one," he had said. "The house is perfect, but the bank won't let it go through without stronger equity. I just need your help. It's only on paper, temporary." His words had rushed together, full of conviction and the kind of charm I'd always struggled to resist. I had sold the bonds I'd been saving since my husband died, taken the tax hit, wired the money without hesitation. Back then, I told myself it was for family, for Andrew's future, for the grandchildren I longed to know. But sitting in that pristine room where even the Wi-Fi password reminded me I was a guest, I realized I hadn't bought security for our family. I had rented myself a shadow role, a silent benefactor no one acknowledged. I opened the envelope I had carried with me, the original deed folded neatly inside. My hands did not tremble as I took another photo, clearer this time, capturing every word, every signature. Then I attached it to an email, typed only one address, my lawyer back in California, Helen Stafford, subject line, reference, no explanation, no plea, just the truth, sent quietly into the night. When I hit send, a strange calm settled over me. There was no anger, no triumph, only clarity. I had always been his safety net, invisible and reliable. Now I would become something else, undeniable. Rachel appeared at my door just before 5, carrying a pale cardigan and a string of imitation pearls. "I thought you might feel more comfortable in these," she said, though her tone left no room for refusal. The sweater was beige, the kind that melted into the background. I glanced at my navy dress hanging on the closet door, one I had chosen carefully for the trip. "I already brought something," I replied. Rachel's smile tightened. "Tonight's crowd is a little formal. You'll blend better this way." I took the clothes without protest, letting her think she had won a small victory. Blending in was what she wanted. Me as quiet decoration, muted and harmless. Downstairs, the dining room table stretched longer than usual, dressed with sparkling glasses, napkins folded into swans, and platters prepared by a catering service. Not a single dish came from Rachel's hands. The entire scene looked staged for an audience, not a family. Andrew emerged from his office in a pale button-down shirt, kissed Rachel's cheek, then turned to me. "Everything looks perfect," he murmured to her, as though I were invisible. When the doorbell rang, the house filled with polished voices and polished shoes, men in pastel sweaters, women in tasteful heels, each carrying bottles of wine and expensive candles. One woman gestured toward me. "And who's this lovely lady?" Rachel's hand was quick on my shoulder. "This is Evelyn," she said brightly, "an old friend of the family. The kids call her Aunt Eve." The words hit like a slap dressed as kindness. I forced a smile, nodded, and accepted the role handed to me. I listened as they spoke about school districts, golf memberships, rising property values. Each word reminded me that this was theater, and I was only a prop on the stage. But when Andrew brushed past me in the kitchen to whisper, "Thanks for playing along," I let my eyes meet his, steady and unflinching. "Is that what you think I'm doing? Playing?" I asked quietly. He faltered, just for a moment, and I knew then I was done with games. The morning sun slanted through the tall windows as Rachel moved briskly around the kitchen, sliding containers of snacks into a cooler. Andrew was folding towels, checking lists on his phone, while the baby fussed in her carrier. Their voices overlapped in a steady rhythm of preparation, like a well-rehearsed play. I stood quietly at the counter, waiting for the right moment. "Would you mind?" I asked lightly. "If I stayed here while you're gone? Just for a little quiet. The house feels peaceful when it's not so busy." Andrew paused mid-fold, glancing at Rachel. She hesitated, her hand hovering over a pack of grapes. "Stay? You mean while we're at the resort?" "Just the weekend," I said, smoothing my hands on the counter. "I'll take care of myself. You won't even notice I'm here." Rachel's smile was quick, practiced. "Of course, if you like." Andrew nodded slowly, though I saw calculation in his eyes. The alarm system, the baby monitor, the possibility of me doing something that might complicate his carefully built image. Still, he handed me the spare key. "Everything's labeled. Garage, back door, mailbox." When the car finally pulled away in a flurry of bags and sunscreen, silence dropped over the house like a heavy curtain. For the first time since I'd arrived, I felt the air shift, freer somehow. I walked into the garage, the scent of concrete and dust replacing Rachel's endless candles. Along the back wall, boxes stacked neatly in rows. One caught my eye, labeled in Andrew's handwriting, "Mom, Misk." My chest tightened. I lifted the lid and found fragments of a life long buried. A photo of Andrew at 15, awkward and smiling beside me at his school award night. Another from our beach trip when he was 9, wind whipping through our hair. A birthday card I had mailed years ago, still sealed. They hadn't thrown them away, but they hadn't kept them either. They had hidden them, tucked away like inconvenient truths. I set the photos carefully on the workbench, lined them up like evidence in a trial that was only just beginning. The second evening alone, I walked upstairs, my steps slow on the polished hardwood. At the end of the hall, Andrew's office door stood ajar. I pushed it open and stepped inside, the air cooler, faintly scented with paper and ink. The room was as curated as the rest of the house. 2 wide monitors, a diploma from Wharton framed in black, awards for insurance sales lined neatly on the shelf. But none of it felt personal. No childhood photos, no scraps of memory, just polished evidence of achievement. I ran my hand along the desk and opened the top drawer. Beneath neatly stacked magazines was a slim binder. Inside, mortgage documents, closing statements, the original deed. My eyes locked on the first line. Evelyn Harper, primary owner. Andrew Harper, secondary. The letters looked sharper than I remembered, as if the ink itself were reminding me of a truth he wanted buried. I sat in his chair, the leather firm under my back, and took out my phone. I snapped another picture, clearer than the last. Then I logged into the county property portal, typing in the address with steady fingers. The screen refreshed, and there it was again. My name first, his second. For years I had been the silent benefactor, the background figure. But as I stared at the glowing screen, I felt something shift. Love had made me quiet, but clarity gave me voice. I opened my email and typed Helen's address again. This time, I attached the documents, adding a single line, requesting reassignment of full authority. My finger hovered only a second before pressing send. The quiet of the room seemed to thicken around me, not heavy, but certain. For the first time, I wasn't just Andrew's safety net. I was the foundation beneath his house, and I had chosen to reclaim it. The next afternoon, a quiet knock echoed at the front door. When I opened it, A woman stood there in a dark blazer, her expression calm, professional. "Mrs. Harper, I'm Layla Ross, here on behalf of Stafford and Associates." She carried a slim folder and a tablet, the tools of finality. We sat at the long dining table Rachel had dressed so carefully for show. I had cleared away the decorative candles and polished bowls, leaving only the documents between us. Layla laid the folder open. "These are standard reassignment papers, pre-filled based on the deed you provided. You are listed as the primary grantor and funding party. Once you sign, we'll initiate the filing. It will be quiet, straightforward." Her tone was steady, free of judgment, as if she had met women like me before, women who gave everything, then were asked to disappear. I signed each page with deliberate strokes, my hand firm, my breath steady. With each signature, I felt a weight shift, the scales balancing back where they belonged. When it was done, Layla closed the folder, tapped her tablet, and said, "As of today, legal reassignment is in progress. You'll receive confirmation by Friday." She handed me a small envelope, her eyes softening just slightly. "You're not alone in this." Then she left, her footsteps fading into the afternoon silence. I remained at the table for a long while, staring at the documents. There was no triumph in me, only clarity. Slowly, I rose and walked into Andrew's office. On the desk sat his framed degree, angled perfectly for display. I pulled a piece of stationery from the drawer, wrote in my hand what words I knew he needed to read. "You asked me not to tell the neighbors I was your mother, and I didn't. You asked me not to talk about the house, and I didn't. But you never asked me to give it away. I won't take more than what is mine, but I will not disappear." I folded the note, slid it beneath his degree, and placed the signed summary packet on top. Then I closed the office door behind me. The silence of the house now filled with truth. The weekend passed, and by late Sunday evening, headlights swept across the driveway. I was sitting in the living room with a cup of tea, waiting. Rachel carried the baby in, tired but still smiling, her voice carrying that practiced cheer. Andrew followed behind, lugging suitcases, his face shadowed from the long drive. He stopped short when he saw me seated calmly, a stack of photographs arranged on the coffee table. His eyes darted to the office door. Ajar. "What did you do?" His voice was sharp, clipped, already accusing. Rachel shifted uneasily, rocking the baby in her arms. "Andrew?" she asked softly, as if she could smooth him down. I stood, placing my cup on the coaster. "I took a walk through your office," I said, my tone even. "I found reminders of who I am and what I built. I left something for you on the desk." Andrew strode past me, shoulders tight, and pushed into the office. Seconds later, I heard the scrape of a chair, the rustle of paper, then silence. Heavy, unbreathing silence. Rachel peeked in, then froze at the sight of the letter lying under his degree, the signed reassignment summary on top. "Oh my God," she whispered, pressing the baby closer to her chest. When Andrew came back into the hall, his face was pale, his jaw locked. "You went behind my back," he said, voice low but shaking. I met his stare, refusing to flinch. "No, Andrew." I stepped back into my own life. "You wanted me hidden, erased, a shadow you could control, but the truth has weight, and it's heavier than silence." Rachel looked between us, her carefully managed composure cracking. "Andrew, you told me." She stopped herself, biting the words, but the doubt in her eyes was louder than anything she might have said. The house felt different now, not curated, not staged, but raw, unsettled, alive with the sound of truth filling every corner. That night, the house was no longer mine, yet it was no longer theirs either. It belonged to the truth that had been spoken aloud. I moved quietly through the rooms, touching the banister, the cool marble of the kitchen counter, the fabric of the curtains Rachel had chosen. They were beautiful things, but they were only things. I had packed a single suitcase earlier, nothing more than clothes and the photographs that mattered. My late husband smiling in the garden, Andrew as a boy with skinned knees and a crooked grin. Memories, not trophies. At the front door, I paused. Andrew and Rachel were still in the office, voices hushed and sharp, unable to escape the weight of the papers and the letter staring back at them. For once, their performance had no audience but themselves. I stepped outside, the night air cool against my face, and pulled the door gently shut. The gravel crunched under my shoes as I walked to the cab waiting at the end of the drive. I did not look back. As the car rolled away, the lights of the house blurred into the distance, shrinking until they were nothing more than a glow against the dark horizon. And with every mile, I felt lighter, as if each turn of the wheels was carrying me not just farther from that house, but closer to myself. There was no revenge in my chest, only resolve. Andrew would learn that love could not be demanded with silence, that wealth built on someone else's back came with strings he could not cut. Rachel would learn that marriage bound her not just to Andrew, but to the truths he had tried to bury. And I, finally, had learned that my worth was never tied to whether I was acknowledged as someone's mother or hidden from the neighbors like a shameful secret. My worth was in the life I had lived, the love I had given, and the courage to reclaim my own name. The cab carried me toward the airport, toward the rest of my life. This time, I was not leaving something behind. I was taking myself with me. Thank you for watching. If you enjoy these family drama and revenge stories, please subscribe and join me for more every day.